when we are doing the will of our true self, we are inevitably doing the will of the universe. In magic, these are seen as indistinguishable. That every human soul is in fact one human soul. It is the soul of the universe itself. And as long as you are doing the will of the universe, then it is impossible to do anything wrong.
There is this connection between everybody and his total environment.
Hey, hi. I just wanted to give a short introduction to the chat with Michelle. Sorry for I don't know, the absence, I suppose. We're about to embark on a pretty wonderful road trip, I guess, to clear our heads and whatnot. And I just wanted to say what a wonderful chat it was with Michelle. And, I don't know if she revealed some things, but she revealed some things to me that I find absolutely enthralling and brilliant and beautiful. And I hope you all will agree. In any case, I should be back in full form soon. Obviously, I think our community, I think humanity as a whole has been going through some really heavy shit, and it's gotten personal. And there's a lot of people affected pretty deeply by health things. So I just want to say, love you, Sam. Love you, Lord Josh. Love you, Jonaside. Love you, Sarath and Robin and Maggie and everyone that's tumbling and facing the brutal heavy of somatic life. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Anyways, thank you for tuning in, and please, I don't know, hug somebody. For the fucking love of God, hug somebody. All right, Honto. I am Keats Ross. This is PRAGMAGICK. Not to give a lot of preamble because there's so much that Michelle does and is so wonderful at: musician, podcaster, tarot diviner, spellcaster, you name it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Embree.
Hi. Yay. Thank you, Keats. Thanks for having me here today. This is so cool.
Yeah, I was so excited to talk to you. I know that we had a wonderful chat a week or so ago, and we've kind of been, our community has been blistering and bubbling with a lot of stuff recently, and it's so good to find like-minded people to continuously keep up to date with and check in with. And yeah, so how have you been?
I've been actually really pretty good. I have so many projects. So the pandemic times and all that kind of times, I have lots to do. So I've actually been pretty good. Mostly focusing on Secret Antenna, which is the podcast that I do with Callie Tinsel. So that's been one of my main focuses lately, actually.
Yeah, and you write a tarot column.
I
I know you do some. What would you consider it, counseling, or is it
Yeah, I do. I do a tarot column with Anti-Gravity magazine, which comes out of New Orleans. It's such a great paper. You can get it online, and you can order it in the mail and all that stuff. And I've admired that paper for a long time. And so actually this month makes 1 year that I've been writing a monthly collective tarot reading for the city of New Orleans, which is just
yeah, that's awesome.
It's so awesome. I'm just grateful every month when I get to do that. So that is definitely one thing that I am really proud of and love to do. And then, I have my private practice, which is, it's interesting that you asked that, because it's like tarot card reading. Yes, it is. It definitely is that. I definitely bring in my cards, and I'm definitely reading your cards. but it's also mostly what I work with people about certainly is yeah, it's a lot more like counseling. And I want my work to be that is the space that I want to be in with people. Like, I'm really not trying to predict what's going to happen to you. Like, that's okay. That's entertainment. That's fun. Like, if you go to a carnival or a psychic fair or something, like, that's good times to see if somebody can predict something. That's fun. But that's not really what I do on a daily basis with people.
I was gonna say, yeah, because and we talked deeply about this the other night, because I have a firm want of some sort of service within this, and like, counseling is something I think about a
Right.
lot, not because I think that, I'm an authority or somebody should, uh take my image or what I do as like part and parcel of what they should do, but I feel that there is something, I feel like I can I know the advice I should be taking, and because of the experiences that I've had in my life, that it's nominal for somebody that's going through a lot of the rough and tumble of life to hear from people that have had that experiential process, you know and when did you start thinking that, yeah, like, I can help people, I could be of service in this?
Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I first went professional with tarot cards in 2012. So it's actually been about 8 years now, which is kind of a while. And when I first really went into doing it, it was just kind of like I was in a space where like I had money to live on for a while, and I wanted to do writing and stuff. And I thought, oh, I love tarot cards. I'll just hang my shingle out. I didn't really need to like, I'll just see what
Yeah.
happened. And I started reading for people at that point in time, and it was I didn't have a lot of clients, and I was pretty cheap, and all of that. But as people came to me, I was like, oh wait, there's really actually a lot I can do with this. And by 2014, I was like, I want to make tarot cards and spiritual counseling and that type of work pretty much my main focus, my full-time gig. And like I said, at that point in time, like I had this little stack of money that I planned to use basically to not work. Like, that was the
Right.
plan for the money, right? And so like it wasn't going to last forever. Right, but it was what I wanted to do with the money, and I never look back and regret it. Like, that's a great, if you can afford it, taking a few years off is a really good idea.
Yeah, this
So
would have been
right,
the year for sure.
yeah. This would have been the year, yeah, for sure. So but by the time that like I needed to like actually like work again, and make an income again, I was like, this is what I want my life to be. And I had realized at that point in time, like, this is not about me predicting your future. This is not really about entertainment. Like, we need to talk about spirit. We need to talk about wounds. We need to talk about,
Yeah, trauma.
trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. And realizing how much, as someone who deals with a lot of trauma from my past, I didn't at first see myself as the most capable person for that. I don't
Hmm.
know why now, looking back on that. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But at the time, back then, I was like, well, you need somebody who like doesn't have those problems to help you. And now I'm like, what?
No.
It's
Yeah.
it's really the opposite. And I find so often with clients, what I do with them is when they're talking about their own state of mind and how they approach the world and these different things with them, I'm like, I'm like you. And here's what happens to me, and here's how I help myself. And that's really helpful to people in one way. The other thing I sometimes can do with people is I'm like, we're just going to sit in the place together where this really hurts. And we're just
Yeah.
going to breathe together, and we're just going to be in this pain together for a second, because like, why should you be alone? Um, Something else that I was doing like during this period of time when I wasn't working was I was touring. I learned that I could perform with my voice in a way that was really helpful to people. So between 2011 and 2011 and 2013, I toured this kind of hellaciously dark show that I did about it was my memoir, it was my story. And it was interesting when I first started doing it that I don't know, my poor first audience. Like I had no idea that what I was saying was so dark. Like I
Right.
was so right. Your own life, you're like, you know how it is, enter any like horrifying trauma, and you're like, you know how they do you, and when
Oh
other
yeah.
people it taught me something. So I feel like I almost killed my first audience, right? Anyway, the point of this is that that story started to evolve, and I realized that rather than me just reading my memoirs, that I could do a type of performance. And that's when I first brought in a musician to work with me. So I
Mhm.
started setting this stuff to like beats, and so that even though I was giving people this really dark story, I was also bringing all of this healing work to it. And one of the things that I said, it was a story called By the Skin of These Words. And it was my own life story, and kind of saying like, I really just survived psychologically and maybe even physically because I found a way to put these words. I found a way to use words, like was what it comes down to. But you could use anything. You could use paint, you could use music, you could use yoga. I don't, but my way was words. So one of the things that I had said during that performance was, for those of you who have like been in these situations, especially as children, like crimes were committed and the people got away, and like nothing, no justice will ever be had. But these things, it wasn't a childhood, it was a crime. It was a crime
Right.
scene, right?
Wow.
And that one of the most powerful things I had felt that I'd said in that story when I was presenting these to audiences was, I was like, but the thing is like, I'm your witness. I know exactly what happened to you. Crimes were committed, lies were told, no justice will be found. I am your witness, and this is my testimony on your behalf. Like I saw the whole thing. And that's like a line from the show is, I saw the whole thing. And when I would say that, the audience would just be like, and have
Mm.
this moment. And at that time, I was like, you know what? I'm not making that up. I do know what happened to you. I did see the whole thing. I am your witness, even if you were alone. So why would we be alone there ever again?
Yeah.
And right. And so in realizing that from that show, that's what I started to really put into my tarot work, is like, why would we be there alone? I know what you went through. I know what it felt like. I know exactly who you are and where you were in that regard. So I don't want you to be there alone. I don't want to be there alone. We can not be alone in that anymore. And so that's so much of what I bring to tarot.
Yeah, I love that. And it's too, we were talking about, when people seek a reader, when someone sings to them with how they read the cards, or, the narratives kind of that they spin, like it has to come from somewhat of an experiential place. You have to share that tether, of vulnerability in doing it,
Yes.
because you can go through the academic realms of what tarot is and how to read, uh,
Yeah.
just in like an encyclopedic kind of idea of it, but that's not what people seek, when they're looking for someone to confer with.
Yeah. No, it's really, really true. The more of myself I put into it, the better off. The better the readings really go. I mean, that's definitely one of the things that I say to my clients is, it's like, you know, if we didn't have something in common, you would have chosen another reader.
Right.
Like you're here today because I'm going to hear something I need to hear, and it's going to come out of my own mouth, you
Right.
know? And so like one thing I've definitely learned is like waking up and like, I'll have my readings scheduled, 2 or 3 readings I'm going to do that day. And I might wake up like, oh God, it's so much work, like
Hmm.
kind of like that, and in my own mood and having my own things go on. But what I know for sure by now is, Michelle, you do that first reading and I come out and I'm like, woohoo! Like, and it doesn't matter what we talk about. And I say that too. I'm like, you can tell me you're going to leave things here, and you can tell me all of these things. Like, we can be in all of these dark places, but none of that's going to stick with me. I'm really just a vessel right now. And like, we're both getting healing through this. So we can have a really hard conversation. We can talk about, suicide. We can talk about getting beat up. We can talk about really dark things. I'm saying, when I get off this phone, I'm going to be like, yeah,
Right. Yeah,
right?
there's a vexation. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's such a, the vulnerability has been like such a prime lesson, I guess I should say, but in hopes of it being a superpower eventually, because I think a lot of in this realm of, kind of occultnic, you know, procedures and practices and stuff. There's the people that move kind of to the top of the echelon somehow are the ones that kind of decree some sort of enlightenment or, put themselves off as some elevated, person that they've,
Oh,
conquered all the transgressions that, us, peons go through or whatever, and it's
right.
like, no, I don't see how it never ends,
Yeah.
you know?
Right. Yeah, it never ends. And then too, I don't know. I mean, just like if you really look into like gurus,
Right,
like what's really in their life is nothing like what they're portraying. I mean, like
right.
sometimes it's like stuff that you're like, God, regular people would never do that crap. Like
Yeah.
you literally are like, So I don't trust that stuff a lot
Yeah,
at
it's like
all.
yeah, well, I always say, what do they do at Thursday at 3 p.m.?
Yeah.
That's
Yep,
who they
that's
are.
right. Yeah, that's who they are.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
and this ties it back to just, was that performance that you did that you said, you killed your audience, was that kind of like a liminal ceremony? Like it was one of those, it was almost a public grieving?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And at first I didn't get it. Like in 2011, it was just as I was a zine writer back in the day. I did, I was a zine writer and I had written a novel also that was published by Soft Skull.
Oh,
And I was kind
nice.
of, yeah. And, so I was in the, like, they called it like the punk lit underground, at the
Uh-huh.
time. And so, that's what I was used to, was being a zinester and being a novelist. And so I went and I was just reading my work, right? And at that time, no, seriously, that first audience, I looked up and the looks on their faces, I'm like, okay, I can draw some of this, like trying to talk to people about trauma doesn't mean I have to tell them every single horrifying, gory detail.
Right. As
But
much as you want to.
right. Well, I think right. I think one of the main lessons and one of the main healing, and that first audience forgave me because I was like, I am so sorry. There are some parts of that story I will never tell again.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. I was doing it because there was this part of me that, one, didn't realize how bad it was, and two, didn't expect to be heard because I'd been saying it so many times in different ways over the course of my life, and nobody heard it. Right? It went over their
Right.
head, right? But once I took up the microphone and I had it written on paper and I had a flyer to tell you to come see me, it suddenly became something that everyone took seriously. And I didn't need to tell you the worst of it. I could allude to it and you would understand. And
Yeah.
so, right. And in the beginning, I really didn't. Those were the two things I didn't know. Like, oh, that didn't happen to you when you were a kid. And two,
Right.
oh, I can not tell you the gory details exactly, and you can still surmise what happened to me. So that was one thing. And then when it turned to this more performative, and I brought in a musician and I broke those stories down so that they were more poetic, and I started to really feel like what you call audiomancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I started to feel that I could do this work on people with my voice. And I hadn't known that I could do that before. And at that point in time, yes, it became the ceremony of grieving. And another thing that I would say at the end of the performance is I would say, and now I can't remember the exact words, but I would say, a murder of crows comes in and picks up the four corners of this room and carries all of this grief away. Right. And so, and then we would have this kind of, impromptu ceremonial, yes, grieving, with this idea that these birds come in and they take it all up off the floor and they take it away with them. And I would include that as part of the work that I did with that particular performance.
So like, yeah, publicizing it, kind of being loud, and not like loud in annoyance ways, but like, having the self speak volumes, through performance, and stuff. Do you find there's accountability in that once you put out those flyers, like, you had to show up? If you didn't want to, be a part, or couldn't, handle the vulnerability or the grieving of that day, like, too bad,
Yeah.
you had to show up and be accountable.
No, that was true for sure. And especially like when we toured it and people would ask, like, how do you like do this every day? And like, basically the answer was like, well, talent, but
Right.
but we were on a mission though too, at the time we were on a mission. We were just the musician I was working with at the time, we were just like, no, this is the medicine that we're bringing to the people, and this is what we're going to do. And so we did manage it. Yeah, but yeah, you got to show up, whether you're like, oh God, today I don't feel like telling my trauma story. Well, too bad, you're on tour with it. And I did tour other things later they're fictional stories. It's a trilogy I did called the Crush Kids stories, and those were 3 different performances that are not that. They're fictional stories, but that are also medicine. They're also very much about healing people. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just speaking through kind of a folkloric lens. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. That's it exactly.
Do you think that's more used too to kind of have a universal voice? Do you find that like maybe fiction helps, the tether between more people, or is it through personal like story?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think it takes both, really. Like, I think it's both. I think there's some people who responded more to the memoir work that I did, and then I think that there's people who responded more to the fictional work that I did. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it takes both, in a big way. But I love the like folkloric like aspect, the mythical way to like it's really healing for people also when you have this like universalizing
Right.
this vulnerability in a way, and showing the possibilities of that vulnerability.
Now, 2020, it seems like there is a universal grieving or, vulnerability through like your tarot work, like your monthly column. Have you kind of unearthed things like just collectively?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit. Doing the monthly column is funny for me because there is a predictive quality to tarot,
Right.
even as much as like I want to strip it out sometimes and be like, well, that's not really the most important thing. I know my editor for the paper down there, he was really taken by the column I had written for the month of May, which had been written mid-April. And if you really look at it, it predicts the George Floyds.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like, yeah, that's kind of what I said when he pointed it out later. Like, he's like, actually, if you realize this was written in mid-April, this is kind of stunning. And I was like, what is he talking about? And then I was like, oh my God. I was like, I was close to like predicting the George Floyd murder to a certain, degree. But what I said in that column really related to it. And it's funny because the only thing, like, I always try to find something that's like, it's uplifting, right? And that month when I had written that, the uplifting part felt really not quite right, but I still kind of felt like I should put it in there. And it's the only part of it that I'm like, if I had it to do again, I wouldn't do that. And
Oh,
now
really?
yes, because it was anytime I feel a little bit like, oh, you're stretching to make things nicer than they are, it always backfires on me. It didn't fully backfire in that column, but honestly, there's like 2 sentences in that column that would have made that particular column even more truthful than it was. So,
Yeah.
and like, yeah. So in doing that column, no, it's funny because I've actually like learned more about the predictive aspects of my ability than I had before. Like, it's not that I don't know that that's there, because people will come back to me and they're like, everything you said was going to happen happened. And I'm like, that's interesting. Like, it
Yeah.
always feels interesting, but the columns taught me a lot about that.
So for you are like the somewhat preternatural or divinatory aspects, are you, because I know you're also a practitioner, you do a lot of like even spell casting online and stuff. Have you what have you surmised over time? Like, are you dipping into something, preternatural and collective, like an unconscious, or is it more like, are you tuning to your own subconscious? Like, what have you been finding has been the more, the biggest reprieve of all of it, or resolve, I should say?
Mm, it's a good question because, like, out of all of it, like, It's interesting, like my background, my upbringing. My mother was like, she was like this. She swore up and down she was an atheist, but she wasn't really, because she'd have like these like Ruth Montgomery books. I don't know if you know that author,
Sure.
but like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. She had these Ruth Montgomery books around. And one time I remember I came home and her and her friend were in the dark trying to find their auras, and I was like, oh my god. Um, but she would swear up and down that she was an atheist, and as a kid, like I couldn't use the word God in the house,
Mm.
right? So, it's just she had been abused by religion,
Yeah.
and she was just like, "We're not doing that here," and I don't believe in this stuff, and I think it ruins individuals and it ruins society, and like these people are crazy. They're crazy, and I don't disagree with her, but she wasn't entirely really atheist either. Obviously, she believes in something, right? Um, but having been raised like that, even then kind of getting into tarot cards and even like, some other like spiritual works that I get into, um, I did not expect to feel as connected to something that maybe I would consider, I don't know, an ultimate consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
um, a collective consciousness. I mean, a singular consciousness, even. There's a way in which I feel like I plug in to this kind of,
Yeah.
I
Fabric. Yeah.
yeah, that
Something.
is kind of
Yeah.
everything. Like, if I could
Mm-hmm.
fully, like, the human brain couldn't fully take in, like, full consciousness without just, like, exploding. Like, we just don't.
Right. Yeah.
We can't.
It's the
We
meta.
can't.
Yeah. That's why we need the Metatron. Because we can't fathom the voice of God or whatever. I get it.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. No, it's exactly right. We can't know all of these things, but there is this way in which I feel like I plug in. I mean, yeah, so like I want to answer your question pretty specifically.
It's a pretty hard one. Yeah.
It's a pretty hard one, but like through this work, and especially like I said, coming from this background where religion, like I feel like so many people that I meet that are new age, they've, so to speak, and I don't want to go off on anyone, but I feel like this is something I need come up against a lot of times. Your kind of new age spirituality would fit really well right directly back into Christianity. Like you've really just
Right.
changed the words, and I'm not going off on anyone. It's understandable that would
Mm-hmm.
happen,
Yeah.
right?
Faith
Um,
based.
Absolutely. And just dogma. It's hard to break dogma. And even when it hurts you and you're like, I've been hurt by the church, so I don't like those words. But then somehow you wind up with a new age kind of perspective that really is just Christianity with a different set of words.
Mm-hmm.
And which again is okay. Um, you know, again, I just don't want to go off on anyone, whatever, but I certainly have a critique of that. So wait, where was I going with this? So so I guess I'm surprised for myself how much I really do feel like there is maybe some kind of collective consciousness, and how much I feel like does come through me from this, from I don't know, I don't even want to say a higher place, but just a different place. I feel like I can log into something. I think the internet's a really good metaphor for spirituality in a lot of
Sure.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like I can really like log into this thing, and then I have something that maybe I generically call guides. I mean, when I'm working, I have my cards in front of me and I'm reading my cards. I have on my right side a lot of people when I'm teaching intuition in classes and things like that, and they say, well, like, how do you know? I'm like, over time, it just got for me that like my guides, generically speaking, come in on my right side, and then you get
Mm.
me over here who's sometimes arguing with them. I'm like, are you kidding? And
Yeah.
and they're like, right, but I know who's who just because I've done this long enough, so I do feel like whatever is over here on my right, which really just comes in, it's kind of like these like orbs that either like nod or shake their head or maybe point to a story that's already in my own brain, like tell this person this story. And sometimes I'll be like, you want me to tell them what? I'll be like, okay, they want me to tell you the story. And then the person will go, oh, and I'm like, all right, I don't know what that meant to you, but it meant something. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many times I leave a reading and I'm like, I don't know, those were the things I was supposed to say to you, and they mean something to people that I know I'll never understand.
Yeah. I struggle with it too. I spoke with Sayroth about this a bunch, where I'm kind of in this, that liminal kind of gray or agnostic static of, is it just my subconscious that I'm tuning, or is there actually something outside? And it switches all the time, you know.
Yes.
But I think, you know, people tune into this stuff and they look for it. It's a lot of times it's through desperation, like it's through
Yes.
adversity. And, you know, given the state of the world now, it's no wonder that people are tuning more to, you know, the like occult practices and tarot and astrology, just to try to calibrate some answers or seek outside. But you're
Yeah.
right, people take it, and it's just different terminology. They just interchange. That's
Mhm.
basically, you just a faith-based idea.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
apparently, like as human beings, we need no matter what. Like we apparently, you know, I'm not saying every person, but like it's a really standard like human need to have a belief that our lives have meaning. I think it's really difficult for people to like move forward when the idea that like this is it, this is your one shot, and if your life is difficult, to whatever degree you are just like, I don't know, if it doesn't have any meaning at all, I'm not sure how to move forward. And so sometimes, you know, people just invest, you know, in that, which is fine. um
Right.
right. But I mean, I have really come to the point where I'm like, I mean, God, do individual lives have meaning? That one's rough, but like there's, but there is something bigger than us for whatever. I don't know. I'm gonna throw this in there because this is really interesting for me. Being raised as somebody who was, you know, don't say God in the house, you know, like don't like, you know, religion is not this way to go or whatever with things. I actually did come to in my 20s to having pretty much a pretty big like relationship with what I would call God, which was really funny because I had an atheist mother and then I was a punk. Like punks don't do that. You know, they're atheists too, you know, right? So
Mhm.
it's just like I spent like probably, you know, most of my 20s into half of my 30s at least hiding it that I like had that I believed in God, right?
Mhm.
And so, and then I like came out with it, and it wasn't like my mom still didn't like it, my friends didn't like it, and I'm like, God, God.
Right. Yeah.
So so that's like, you know, gosh, you know, over
But
10
it
years.
was just, it was like your idea of the absolute, right? Or like, yeah,
Yeah,
like you were saying, it had no, you didn't mean a Christian God or
no,
a nomination at all.
right.
Right.
Right. But I also didn't feel the need to use a different word, you know, because sometimes people are like, oh, source. And I'm like, well, we're still, that's fine,
Right.
but we're still talking about God, you know, the universe,
Exactly.
that's fine, but we're still talking about God, you know. So I didn't find a need to use a different word for it. What is interesting for me is this past year, because I feel like, you know, you get to a certain place with your spirituality and you're like, okay, that's where I'm at. That's who I am. Like, that's my spirituality. I got a handle on it. I'm just going to move ahead. This is sometimes why I feel like people choose religion anyway. And they're like, well, guess what? I don't have to think about anymore. Like, right? My religion just kind of explains to me how to
Right.
practice. I don't have to think about it anymore. Right. And I can appreciate that even more than ever, like this year, because something that just happened after all of the, I mean, literally just a few months ago, back maybe February, March, something like that. I just woke up and I had this realization that, like, because I was praying all these years, I've been praying. I would just pray to God. It just made sense to me. I was comfortable with it. Even like my mom and my friends are like, "Oh my God," you know, I would still made sense to me, and I would pray to God, right? So this year that changed because I woke up one day and I had this realization that or whatever, my whatever you want to call it, realization might not be the right word, but there was a shift in my spirituality and having this realization for me that what I was calling God actually had no was a completely neutral force. It's a completely neutral creative
Right.
force. And like,
Personality less.
yes,
Yeah.
and doesn't have this like, God is not, God is a creator, sure, like spitting things out of a black hole, basically, like,
Hmm.
I don't know, there's
Yeah.
that. And it doesn't have this like, I want things to be good. I'm not, I mean, like to say that God is creating from all love, I'm like, well, not really. I
Right.
mean, God is just like creating whatever God can create, kind of without personality, without determination, without any of the, without having a desire for how that thing will go or even
Hmm.
really thinking about it, so to speak, right? this is like new stuff for me, and this created only a mild crisis because I've had so many spiritual crises at this point in time. I'm like, tell me something I don't know, okay?
Yeah, bring it on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll just, drink Diet Pepsi and eat candy in bed for a few days.
I know how that goes.
Yeah, right. So I wouldn't say it was a crisis, but at night when I go to sleep, I'd be like, dear black hole, no, that's not working for me, especially since you don't give a shit. So so I went through that for a few months, but then I'm like, but then like I got a little bit closer to like what I would consider my guides. I hadn't had a direct conversation with them for a while. You start to take it for granted, especially for me. I'm seeing them all the time working with other people, so I had kind of stopped talking to my guides. I mean this really generically.
Sure.
I had stopped talking to my guides, personally, for a long time. And so I started talking to them personally again, and they agreed that this was like, yeah, no, you're right, the source of all things is neutral. That doesn't mean that we don't have plans. And it made me think about the concept of Jesus, which is a big concept for me, and there's a reason that that's so, which we could talk about if you wanted to, but at any rate, like the guides and the things were like, that doesn't mean that we're not real and don't have desires. Just because God creates indiscriminately doesn't mean we're indiscriminate or that we're meaningless. Oh, I'm getting chills right now. They're
like lesser gods, like
the lesser gods. What a great way to put it. And I'm like, and then it makes sense as to why I feel like we need to like onboard, so to speak, with these, lesser gods. I love that, to onboard with like these forces that do have desires for us, that are really, really quite beautiful, and have desires for themselves that are really, really quite beautiful, and are made of love. Right? Just because God is neutral doesn't mean that love doesn't come out of it. And this is new stuff for me, Keats. This is new territory for me. We would have had this conversation a year ago, and I'd say, no, I believe in God, and like, I believe God created all things, and God is love. Like we would have had that conversation, but now I'm like, nope, God's a black hole.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's not, there's something I find, I don't know, just romantic is the first word that comes to mind, talking about a black hole, which is really funny, but
right.
But like there's something, I don't know, there's just a relief or like a resolve, like of just the gentle understanding that this is a personality-less God. He is not a he. It is, there was no, we are not the end all be all, the human species. God does not look like us, doesn't have our petty wants and qualms, and but there is, then there's that challenging aspect, but there is perhaps, there's just levels. There's like I'd hate to use the term hierarchy because fuck hierarchy, but but you know what I mean? There's some sort of structure about maybe the things that preternaturally that we deal with and experience during these practices and stuff, that isn't if everything's about the source, everything's about the absolute, there's still things we have to weave and have relationships with below that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And especially with our limited little human capacity here.
Yeah.
Did
you, when you were tuning like your guides, was it just through continual practice of, reading tarot and kind of tuning in that way, or did you use other kind of methods to help you commune with them?
Okay, well, I had this experience. So I, in 2008, from the time I was like 17 until I was 35, I was a really, really heavy drinker. I was a blackout drunk. And in the beginning of 2008, January of 2008, I quit. And I did this with like, I took Camprol, which is like a cessation drug. Like it was, it was, like this was very serious business. Like I had not been an adult person who was not a blackout drunk, like straight up. And I couldn't quit without help, and I couldn't sleep. And like, this is serious business, right? This isn't just like somebody who's like, oh, having those couple glasses of wine is really taking it out of me now.
Harm reduction. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No, this is right. This was serious business, and I was someone who'd like I'd been through DTs before, you know, and it was serious business, right? So anyway, that's January of 2008. I'm gonna quit, and so I decide that like I have no idea how to like live. I don't know, and I can't sleep, and all these things are going on. And I was a writer. I'd already published a novel by then, but I'd always wanted to get my master's degree, and so I decided I would go back to school and get my master's degree. And I fell in love with Goddard College up in Vermont, which is a low residency program. And so I decided that I was going to apply there. And if I didn't get in, I'd apply the next year. That's where I wanted to go. Right. So I send in my application. So this is, and then June of that year, I'm in. I'm going back. I'm going to get my master's degree. One of the things I'd wanted to do my whole life. So I'm like, great. And this is still like, I still can't sleep at night. I'm still totally unsure as to whether or not I can not drink. Like, you know, and then like the cessation drugs started making me dizzy, so I couldn't even drive to work. I'm like, well, that's not going to work, you know.
And that's the drug that like you get physically ill if you imbibe.
No, it's the opposite. She had told me, I'd asked my doctor, I'd said, do you know about something called Camprol? And she was a good doctor. I was lucky to have her at the time. She's like, I haven't heard of it, but I'll look it up. And if I can get it for you, I will. If not, I'll give you Antabuse, which is what you're talking about. And I said, that won't work. I said, punishing me does not work.
Yeah,
you know what I made a joke? I said, ask my father, you know, like, I didn't really, like, right. I didn't, you know, like punishing me does not work. Like cause like, here's the deal with Antabuse. Like once you get violently ill and throw up, then you can get drunk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I know that from people in the military. So anyway, Camprol, no, actually what Camprol does, or what they hope that it does, is it targets, because like when you drink that much, your brain receptors like close down. So you go into extraordinary depression because your like serotonin receptors are literally closed down. So they had hoped, they weren't sure, but they felt like Camprol could target that and help your receptors open, right? I don't know if it did that, but psychologically, taking these big horse pills like worked for me until they started making me dizzy, and I actually had to call off a day from my job. And I was like, well, I can't lose my job, you know? Yeah. So anyway, so I stopped taking those things, and I was really shaky. And I went to my first low residency gig up there in Vermont. You know, you go and you stay for a week, and you do full-time work for the rest of the semester, but you send it in through the mail. And so, and that isn't even why I took that program. I just really I was really attracted to the program. So anyway, here's the deal. So I get there, and this man named Paul Selig is
I know Paul Selig. Yeah.
All right.
The channeler?
Yes, except that's not what I got to chill over me. That's not what he did at the time. This is 2008. His first, I Am the Word didn't come out till 2010. It came out the month I graduated. I know this. So anyway, he was my program director, right? I got chills all over me telling you the story.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. So he gave this opening speech to us while we were there, and I was like, holy shit, just listening to him talk. I was like, who is this person? What is he saying? Like, what is he doing? This is so funny. This is such a funny story. I was really enamored of him. I was like, how is he like, you know, and one of the things he said is like, none of you are in this room by accident. And I was like, whoa, what is so wild about him saying that? Like, why do I feel so drawn, you know? So, okay. So I go, and he had this little dog at the time named Darla. And I think he has a different dog now, but he had a little dog named Darla, a little Yorkie mix. And it was so cute. And I love dogs, whatever. And he carried around, he had that dog with him everywhere. Only person I would see him in the cafeteria with her in a bag. And he'd be at the salad bar, and she'd be over that plexiglass going like this. And I'm like, the only person to get away with that's Paul Selig, right? Anyway, I go up to his office because I really just want to meet him, right? And I walk in his office, and I put my hand out to shake his hand, and he holds up the dog. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's a fucking weirdo, you know? And I was like, I just want to say, like, I thank you, you know, for having me in your program. I'm really happy to be here. And he's like, okay, thanks. You know, I walk away. I'm like, what a fucking weirdo, you know? And it wasn't until later that I realized, like, he didn't want to shake my hand because he'd get all this information, right? I didn't know anything about this, right? I didn't know anything about this. So, okay, so here's one of the things that happens. During your first 2 residencies, you can't take any classes from Paul Selig, who's an amazing writing teacher and an amazing writer, okay? you can't take any of his workshops, writing workshops, until you're in your second year. And I was so fascinated by him, right? And so the only thing you could take in your first residency was it was called the Writer's Healing Circle. Now, mind you, we're at a time in my life where I see those words and I'm like, oh God, you know, right? Like, this hippie dippy fuck bullshit, you know? And so like, but it got passed, but I had to go because I was so right into like, I had to go find out more about Paul Selig. So I go down to this thing that, mind you, Keats, is beneath me. Okay, it's all beneath me, right? This Writer's Healing Circle is so far beneath me, you can't even believe it, right? But that having been said, I love how all the crappy parts of my personality come to make this moment for me. So, but that having been said, even though it was beneath me, I had to be better at it than anybody in the room, right?
Yeah.
So, so I get in there and I pull my desk. It's a carpeted room, you know, the desks are all whatever. I pull my desk up to the front. I sit down with my notebook and I'm ready to like take my hippy dippy, like, I am worth it. I am, you know, like whatever the hell hippie shit you're gonna do, right? I'm gonna do it better than anybody else in that room. And so then he comes in and he says, okay, everybody make a circle. And we make a circle. And I'm like, yeah, of course, we're hippies. We gotta make a circle. So, but I'm up at the doors behind way, you know, like I'm up at the front of the room and I have to get through the room. I'd have to go through everybody to get out the door, right? This is an important aspect, right? Because that's my good student. I'm gonna do better than everybody else, right? So anyway, he's like, listen, here's the truth about me. Here's where you are right now. You're in this room. I'm a channeler. And I was like, you're fucking kidding me. Right? And he's like, so like I channel these guides, you know, blah, blah, blah. He goes on about it. And he says, I recommend that every single one of you leave right now. And he says, especially since Mark Doty is next door. I don't know if you know who Mark Doty is. But he's a writer. He wrote a really great book called Heaven's Coast that is about losing his boyfriend to AIDS, which is like, if you need grief care, please read Heaven's Coast. It's amazing. Anyway, Mark Doty, he's a famous writer, but at the time he was particularly popular. And so Paul Selig says, Mark Doty is next door doing a writing workshop. None of you will ever have the opportunity to do a writing workshop with Mark Doty ever again. I recommend all of you go next door and do that because I am a regular roadside attraction. Keats, I would have, except then the third part of my personality was I couldn't disrupt anyone to get out the door.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so here's these three things about me that are coming together to keep me in that chair. All right, so Paul Selig starts channeling. And we're all sitting in this circle and like literally I can feel a ring of fire go through our hearts because there were some people who wanted to sit on the floor and he's like, I actually need you all at the same level. And I'm like, God, this shit's really getting deep, huh? You know, but no, I can feel it. And the thing was, I went into this incredible like trance space and where everything I was hearing, like I couldn't have taken notes. There was no way to do it. And like, I was like, holy shit. But it's okay because I'll never forget anything I'm hearing because this is the absolute 100% truth. All right. And so it was incredible. It was one of the most incredible experiences in my life. And so when it was over at this point in time, I don't think they do this anymore, but at this point in time, his guides would do work on the individual people in the circle. And so he got to me, this is June of 2008. I quit drinking in January of 2008. So 6 months later, and I am not sure about myself. I am still really shaky. I still can't sleep. I still don't know how to live without drinking, right? Yeah. And so we stand up and he gets to me, you know, and again, like I didn't know what chakras were or anything, but when they're like, open your crown chakra, I was like, you must open your crown chakra better than anyone's ever opened their crown chakra before, right? And so like I'm trying really hard and they get to me and they're like, they tell me, you know, like, tell her she's doing a good job. And he's like, they say you're doing a good job, you know, or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I really got the crown chakra open. Yeah. Hey, got an A+ on opening my crown chakra, whatever the fuck that is. I did it better than anybody else. Okay. And so like, you know, but then, and he gets irritated with the guides. He's so funny because he'll talk back to him. And he's like, I just told her. And they were like, oh, they want me to tell you again that you're doing a good job. And he was so pissed off, you know? And I was like, oh, they're not talking about my crown chakra. They're talking about drinking.
Right.
Right. And so I walked out of that room and I knew, I was going to be able to take those workshops more as over the next couple of years when I went to my residencies, and that I would have one I'd have another chance in January, but I'd have another one the following June. And I remember I walked out of that room and I was like, it doesn't matter. If you can come back to this chair in 1 year, even if you start drinking again, everything will be different. Nothing will ever be the same. All you have to do is make it back here without taking a drink for a year, and your life has changed. And it was an absolute fact. And so I did it. I made it back. But anyway, that's how I met Paul Selig, and that's how I met my guides, which I think are the same guides that Paul Selig told. I think that they are, and they're nodding their heads. Like, I've been doing this with them for 10 years now, which is kind of incredible. It's like legitimately like 10 years, like a couple of months ago. 12 years, I guess that was 12 years ago. But anyway, I feel like I've been working with those guides so there's your answer to your question. There's my story about how it came into my life. And I was not, at that point in my life, like, this was not the kind of thing I was looking for. I actually, I had 2008, my novel came out in 2006. And in 2008, I still wanted to be a novelist. Like, my idea was still to be like a famous, like, literary writer. That's where I was going with this, not to sit in a room and like feel my soul filled by fucking channeling, like that's not who I was at the time.
So how did that reconfigure, your trajectory moving forward? So you said you wanted to be a novelist and everything. So what morphed? Like, what became your new trajectory?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's a little bit of what, because actually my novel came out in the fall of 2005, which I had just been through Hurricane Katrina because I was living in New Orleans. Right. And so that actually had changed my writing. I thought I would go back to writing novels, but at that point in time, I needed to write plays. And so I had written a play during that period of time, which had a production that was like amazing. I loved that whole aspect of my life. So I was actually studying playwriting when I was there, but I did think I would go back. But also, like, playwriting, novels can, like, you can veer off. You can be like, let's go have a picnic and talk about nothing. Right. You can do that in a novel. In a play, you can't. Every single word has to have a reason. It's why. Action. Yeah. And there's no extraneous words, and there's certainly no extraneous, like, storylines. Like, why is that word there? If you cannot answer that question, you have to take the word out, right? So that was part of why I wanted to study playwriting too. I just love I love the discipline of playwriting. I think playwriting requires the most discipline out of any form of writing that there is. So that's part of why I really thought I'd go back to writing novels once I found that discipline in playwriting. But I didn't. And what wound up happening then is I write these performances that I do with a musician, right? Mm-hmm. That bring in these guides. So that's really how it changed me, is that I really had no desire. What really changed is I had no desire to go back to the industry and I'm working class, putting yourself working class into the literary industry. Like, it's not that it can't be done. It's that you have to take up really upper class values that I don't have. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't care. I feel that. Money. Like, you make $7 an hour and you smoke cigarettes. I'm sorry, I don't have an opinion about that. And hopefully you get, obviously, like, you don't put that in a novel, but in some ways you do. Like, there is this way that literature makes the upper class feel like there's just nothing you could do. And, as like a lifelong anarchist, I don't believe that either. I'm like, well, you could redistribute the wealth, but, don't get me started. So the way that it changed me then, the playwriting combined with the channeling and the tarot cards and all these different things came together. And it put me on this different path in life to where I'm like, no, I want to use my capacity for language, for speaking, for public speaking, which I've done my whole life, and performance, and my ability to write and my ability to tell a story. I want to use, and tarot cards are all about speaking and telling stories too. I want to use all of those things to do really important, like, healing work on all of us, including myself, and to put something into the world that I think doesn't serve the upper classes. So, like, if I can nutshell all that into one place, it's like, it's actually true. I've actually really just described myself pretty well.
I love that. Yeah, that sings to me. I feel like a lot of similarities between
Yeah,
us
good.
for that, because yeah, I've definitely feel disjected by kind of the upper echelon things, especially as a creative person or as a writer,
Yeah.
as kind of an ex academic in a way.
Me too.
It's very, very disgruntled, especially from like an impoverished upbringing, and
Uh-huh.
you know. But
Hmm.
yeah, there's something to be said. I think I don't know. I made that joke earlier about hierarchy sucking, and it kind of plays into this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. No, yes, it does. I mean, like, I don't know. Again, I'm not really trying to go off on anyone, but like the couple of people I know from working class backgrounds that are starting to be successful in the literature industry, they really throw their family under the bus like caricatures,
Yeah.
And I'm like, no can do, like no
Yeah.
can do. Like there's a lot of this stuff. I cannot make the upper classes feel better about keeping the rest of us poor. I don't have it in me.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I was gonna ask, I think it'd be probably a good ending kind of question, but obviously you commune with these guides when you write, when you create.
I do.
Do you have a way of kind of describing what that process is like?
Um, yeah. Ooh, see, I get chills on my knees. I read so much through my body, and anytime like
Nice.
they're kind of around, yeah. Um, I really, like it'll just like when I go into my writing, like I have a pretty good writing discipline, which I think is important, if nothing else, just I put up tarot cards every day, 5 days a week on social media, which keeps me accountable not only to my like spiritual tarot practice, but also just every day I have to write something, at least a
Mm-hmm.
sentence, like right, which I think is important. But what if I look back through my notebooks, or even places where I've typed into Google Docs, just free typed, the notebooks, my writing gets really big and really large, and even in the Google Docs, like things, like the typos will get going, and there's all kinds of weird, strange word uses that I wouldn't use. There
Mm.
are definitely sometimes, it's funny, it's kind of like it's like lucid dreaming a little bit. If you suddenly go, oh shit, I'm dreaming, you wake up, right? I mean,
Oh
or
yeah.
like you're just like, oh shit, I'm lucid
It
dreaming, you like
it
wake up.
kicks you out. Yeah.
Yeah, it kicks you out. Yeah, it's kind of similar. Like if I realize they're there, I'll be like, oh my god, they're here, and then I'm like, oh shit,
Yep.
where'd you go?
Scared them
So
away.
yeah, which is not them, it's me.
Sure.
Like
Right.
now suddenly being in a state of mind that isn't accepting of like full reality and wants to recompartmentalize myself into what I'm used to. So by saying, which is true with lucid dreaming too, because I mean, that's obviously just something you can do, right? But
Mm-hmm.
since the moment you kind of say like, no, I'm not supposed to be able to do this, it's like, well, fine. And it's the same thing with the guys. As soon as I'm like, oh my God, you're all here. It's so crazy. They're like, it's like, you just slam the door. um, but they definitely do come through my process and in different ways. And there are definitely times too when there's certain things in my writing or in my work, whether I'm reading cards, like there's certain things, like that the cards are not gonna like that my guides are not gonna come in on in a card reading. If somebody's like really talking to me about like certain things that really just are gonna require two human beings, like where it would be fraudulent for me to say, well, the guides think you should. It's like sometimes it's too serious. It's health and relationships in these ways that it's like, well, we don't do that. That's manipulative and silly.
Mm-hmm.
So the same type of thing in my writing sometimes where I'm like, okay guys, let's like do this thing. They're like, oh no, sorry, that's all you don't think we picked you for nothing, do you? We picked you because you know how to write. Like you literally like like you have a master's degree in writing. Like we chose you for that reason in part, right? So
Mm-hmm.
because not the degree, but just the ability. So they're like at certain points in time, they're like, no, that's all you. Like we inspired it, but now you got to put the details together and turn it into a poem. That's all you.
Yeah.
You got to do that work. So I think that's part of it too. I will say this, like a part of what I teach with intuition with people also is like, you cannot intuit something you don't know. So knowledge is the way. You want greater intuition, create greater knowledge for yourself, whether it means reading science books or history books or teaching yourself how to code. It doesn't matter. The guides will find metaphors usable in anything that you know, but you have to know things. Like it's like trying to throw a dart at a dartboard that isn't there. Like all the
Right.
guides can really do is throw darts at things that you know, so to speak. And so the more you know, the more they have to utilize. I hope that
Right.
answers.
They have to speak through your filter of self.
Yeah,
Yeah. And if you
exactly.
don't have the skills or those ideas, they can't translate it.
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
I think it's super synchronous. We're talking. I think I've been pretty public about, my drinking as of late, and it's, it's one of those gnawing annoyances. There's nothing been too dramatic or awful, but it's, I'll put it like this: like through my long, kind of strenuous, mental health stuff and everything, I never utilized drugs or alcohol or anything to create or write. And
Mhm.
it makes me think, excuse me, that, it's because I was trying to make those channels more clear. It's the drugs and the drinking in the past were for everything else.
Right,
Yes.
right, right.
But I really appreciate you telling that story. And yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll all get through this together.
Yes, we yes we will. Even if it takes 1,000 years, we will
Right.
get through it together.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Oh, thank you. It's been so fun.
Yeah, this has been great. Obviously, we'll keep talking, and I hope to have you on again. And yeah, I'll have this out this week. And
Great.
please plug. You have an amazing podcast with Callie that you're about to just do called The Secret Antenna. If you want to shout out all of your wonderful projects, please do.
Oh, yeah, great. Secret Antenna, you can find us on Anchor and Spotify, but probably the easiest way to find us is follow us on Twitter, where we'll put up our podcast plus all our kind of supplemental materials. We are doing a history of COINTELPRO. So if you don't know what that is, come find out. If you do know what it is, come be aghast with us on the subject. That's one of my major projects. Anti-Gravity Magazine, also a good one to go ahead and find on Twitter. That is New Orleans absolute. And I'm saying this just because I write for them. I have always been like, oh my God, that's the best lefty rag in the entire world. So that's Anti-Gravity. So find that. Those are probably my two main things. And then michelleembree.com is my website. And you can find me there for readings for card readings and things of that nature. And I put up a tarot card Monday through Friday on all of my social media. Twitter's the best place to find me.
Cool. I'll have all of those links in the description.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks,
Okay.
Michelle. We'll
All
talk
right.
soon.
Yeah. Bye for now.